So welcome, Kevin and Darby and Erica and Laura. You get a personalized presentation here. Thank you for, taking the time to learn more about the recreational amenities study on the Erie Canal. We just call it the amenities study for short. But we're really excited to share the findings with all of you to see what's happening on a broader scale and, to see what the trail looks like on a regional level, specifically in Region 2. And it's really, a learning opportunity on how you can take back some of these ideas and recommendations so you can prioritize future investments in your own community. So this study was a joint effort between Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor and New York State Canal Corporation, with funding from the Canal Corporation and the Department of Environmental Conservation's Mohawk River Basin Program. And, due to funding and staffing and not wanting to take on what we could reasonably manage, we only studied the land and water trails of the Erie. But it is intended that we will be studying amenities on the Cayuga Seneca, the Champlain, and the Oswego canals at a later date. We also worked with Collier's Engineering and Design to conduct the study, and Leanne was our project manager. She did an amazing job with, managing the study from, start to end. But anyways, I will introduce myself and I will let them introduce themselves. We have three co-presenters. I'm Mona Karen. I'm the Director of Trails and Stewardship with the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor. And then Sasha and Leanne are co-presenters, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Sure. I'll go. I'm Sasha Del Perel. I'm the trail manager at the New York State Canal Corporation. We partner with Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor on a number of joint programming, and we are contributors to the study.
And my name is Leanne Kimber. I'm with Collier's Engineering and Design. As Mona mentioned, I was the project manager on this study. I'm an urban planner based in our Rochester office, but we also have folks in Buffalo, Syracuse, and Albany who were very helpful in helping us collect data for this project.
Okay, so I don't know if we should pause because Kevin had to leave for a second. He had a poor connection.
I think he'll catch up.
Yeah.
All right, he'll catch up. All right, so here's a look at the agenda. I'm going to share some background on this study and why it was needed. And then Leanne will take us through the study and the methodology. Leanne, followed up by Sasha, who will share information about the recently released guiding documents from the Canal Corporation. And then we'll follow up with funding sources. So anyways, if we could move to the next slide. We decided to study recreational amenities on the Erie Canal and the Canalway Trail because we've all noticed the uptick in use since the completion of the Empire State Trail. And add to that the development of the water trail programs like the Canalway Challenge on the canals and the events and tourism infrastructure grants. Plus many communities draw people for their own canal themed events. And, as we all know, we've been celebrating the bicentennial for the Erie Canal, and this study is very much a forward-looking, vision to bring us into the next century. With multiple users of the Erie Canal and the Canalway Trail and the water trail, the system has posed a challenge for creating a consistent and predictable experience for all visitors. And this study really considers how to address those challenges for the next century. And it's a tool for project planning for making improvements on the canal system. If we could go to the next slide. Here's a shared vision between Erie Canalway and the New York State Canal Corporation. And really it boils down to creating a world-class destination for recreation, gaining recognition as one of the most accessible trails in the nation, And we're also looking to evolve from a linear recreation way and into a more complete network of waterways, parks, and trails. And then finally, again, we want to create a consistent and predictable experience on the trail. So with that, I will transfer it over to Leanne. I'm sorry, Sasha, who will take us to the next slide.
Great. Thank you, Mona. So it goes without saying that this is a very important year for the Erie Canal as we celebrate its bicentennial. This important milestone has prompted a lot of thought and discussion about what the next century of the canal system will look like as we continue to transition from a system of industry and commerce to a recreational corridor. And in May of this year, the Canal Recreation Commission, a commission established by law in 1992, released the canal's 2050 recreation plan. And this plan builds off the strong foundation laid in the commission's first recreation plan, which was released in 1995. This vision sets the stage for the next 25 years and beyond for the canal system. The plan sets long-term frameworks for improving access, amenities, and experiences along the canal corridor. It was developed over the course of nearly 2 years and included extensive stakeholder input. The plan outlines strategic priorities for investment and revitalization over the next few decades. And I want to just note that this plan isn't only intended for New York State Canal Corporation use or state parks or DEC. It's also aimed to provide a framework for canal communities, local leaders, stakeholders, businesses, and also advocates. The plan outlines a set of guiding themes, which include caring for the canal. So how do we care for an expansive system like the New York State Canal system? And developing design and maintenance guidelines for all types of landscapes and facilities. We also thought about convening. How do we find ways to bring people to the system through infrastructure and interpretation? Connection is also a big part of this plan. So how do we bridge connections between upstate and downstate and also among neighboring resources, other trails and waterways? Commemorating the history and culture of the canal, but bringing in all of its forms so that we recognize different cultures and different people in its telling of the history. And then we also focused on catalyzing, so bringing revitalization to canal communities by developing and embracing local identities and establishing public spaces and amenities. And then championing. So how do we support and advocate for the trail as a focus of ours? And lastly, cultivate. So how do we focus primarily on natural resources, upstate eco regions and natural systems? Instead of fighting against them, we need to embrace them and use them to our benefit. So those are the themes, and building off of that, with all this energy and happening with the Canal Corporation and us envisioning it for the future, we wanted to start looking at our amenities and what type of the look of the canal system, the public facing aspect of it. And so in doing that, next slide. The Canal Corporation wants to look more like a park. And so we want to provide a more consistent experience when people are out on our property, just like the way you would see the same types of signs and benches when you're at a state parks facility, the same way that you see mostly the same type of coloration when you are on state lands. Canal Corporation would also like to provide that consistency of experience. And so on the left-hand side of your screen, you will see Canal Corporation's new branding identifiers. So the top one is the Canal Site Identifier. This will be featured at Canal Corporation on Canal Corporation work equipment, on our lock houses and waterway signs, as well as facility signs. These identifiers are intended for Canal Corporation use. However, if DOT or a community needs to use this identifier to provide wayfinding within the town, we certainly would welcome you to use it. Then the one below that is the new Canal Trail Identifier. This is a new brand for the Canalway Trail and is intended for use of all Canalway signage, so regardless of ownership. So this is a brand and identifier that belongs to anyone. And then we also adopted new signage design guidelines, and this is for canal property and permitted property. And these guidelines are for land-based signage and provide required graphic standards, fonts, layouts, colors, materials, and installation details for wayfinding and interpretive signs. All right, next slide. Oh, actually, before I move on, I just want to mention about the signage, and it's also related to the amenities too, that the rollout of these new signs and new tourism identifiers is going to be gradual and on an as needed basis, ensuring that updates align with maintenance schedules and new development, as well as community improvement efforts. So we're not going to wholesale replace the thousands of signs that exist out on the system. We're going to do it gradually over time. And lastly, we've adopted a new set of canal amenity standards. So we're calling it the Kit Apart. That features new bike racks and bike fix-it stations, drinking fountains, light posts, and benches, as well as some other amenities. These would be required on Canal Corporation land, as well as Canal Corporation permitted property. So we do definitely have communities that permits with us. They would need to comply with these new standards. They are certainly not a requirement for any non-Canal Corporation property. So municipalities and counties that have their own property, you are welcome to consider these designs in your upcoming projects, but certainly don't need to use them. And I want to mention that sustainability, maintenance, material, and costs were considered in the selection of these amenities. And we, in the sign it and the standards that we released, we have the vendor options for all of them. So we are hoping to make it as easy as possible to purchase these. And so we just released these and we are communicating them out to communities currently. And, you know, in line with the 2050 plan and the release of, or I guess wanting to provide a more park-like system for visitors, we were thinking about, you know, the types of amenities that are provided, but then what actually exists out on the system, what needs to be replaced, and where are there gaps. So if this fed really nicely into the work that we are doing with Colliers and with Erie Canalway. So the study came just in time for us to release all these new standards. And so I'll let Leanne take it over to really talk through the study itself. Thank you.
Sure. Sounds good. Thanks, Sasha. So yeah, as Sasha and Mona mentioned, for many reasons, this study, the conditions assessment and long-term planning for recreational amenities on the Erie Canal, the timing was really great to undertake a study of this type. Before we get into the details, I kind of just want to set the stage for the purpose of this study, who it's intended for, and how it will be used. So as it was mentioned, you know, we were engaged by Erie Canalway and Canal Corporation to undertake this study. I think they're going to be the primary users. You know, it's really meant to be an internal planning document that provides a great reference for planning for capital investments, a new guide to consider, you know, when grant applications come in, you know, which might be the highest priority based on the needs that we see on the system, and also to track progress over time and see how things change and how they improve based on this, you know, sort of 2024 baseline. But with that said, you know, as I think Mona mentioned, the document is public on our website and is, you know, certainly a fantastic resource for communities, nonprofits, anyone who has an interest in improving the trail experience or has property along the trail and has an opportunity to add amenities or to enhance recreation in any way. It's also a great way for potential private vendors who might be interested in providing bike rental programs or paddlecraft rentals to see, you know, where those, there are gaps in that system and where those might be needed and best used. So our project goals, we set out to accomplish these 4 things at the top. The first, and very simply, just understand what is out on the system right now, what amenities are there, and what is the condition of those amenities. Second, to identify gaps in the system. So where is there a very large gap between 2 picnic areas, 2 restrooms, 2 hand lunches, or 2 marinas? And where is it so significant that that gap would impact the ability of someone to use the trail? We spent a lot of time understanding user needs and preferences. I think we spoke to some folks who are on the call today, and I'll talk more about our stakeholder interview process later on. And then lastly, taking those 3 things together, identifying opportunities to enhance, whether it's the condition of the amenities, the type of amenities, or the spacing of amenities along the trail, to enhance the overall experience. And these 4 project goals feed very well into the broader strategic goals that were sort of the impetus for this study, which is to enhance the recreational experience, to elevate the excitement and the attraction of using the Erie Canal and Canalway Trail, to improve amenities for people of all abilities. So making sure that the trail is as accessible to as many people as possible. And in attracting more people to use the trail, giving people a greater sense of pride in the trail, can we potentially strengthen stewardship of both trails by users in the long run? I want to briefly touch on our methodology and kind of how we set out to undertake this very large study. So we relied on several sources of information as inputs to our analysis. The first was stakeholder input. So we had a very robust community engagement effort that Mona helped orchestrate. We used several guiding documents, not only online resources, but also, the New York State Canalway Water Trail Guidebook, other online sources, and maps that helped us identify key locations along the trail. Sort of the largest input was certainly our field data collection effort, where we, traveled the entire trail system and collected, data on a mobile device. And then we also supported this with best practices research, not only on accessibility best practices, but also looking at other trail systems that have had success and understanding what makes their sort of gathering places most useful to their users. We did some quantitative analysis based on all of those inputs, as well as GIS analysis to understand the condition, the spacing, the types of amenities that are on the system now, and where there may be gaps. And then also looking at some obvious barriers to accessibility and how we can improve access along the trail. So those kind of funneled out into our recommendations and findings, which center around spacing of amenities, enhancing accessibility, identifying hubs and nodes of amenities or places to gather and experience the trail. And then on a more global scale, what needs and opportunities exist for enhancing amenities overall. As I said, our stakeholder engagement process was very robust. With Mona's help, we orchestrated over, I think, 16 focus groups and stakeholder interviews that we held virtually, just knowing the broad sort of geographic scope of this. But we did, take pains to make sure that we were speaking to people from all different user types, all different areas of interest or stakeholder sort of focus, and then also the geographic scope. So this is just a list of some of the groups that we spoke with. As you can probably imagine, a lot of these groups all had their own interests based on geography, based on mode, based on interest. But the things that we heard over and over again as real key themes that were broadly applicable to every group were the need for consistency and predictability on the trail. So consistency refers to, being on the trail and seeing the same condition, the same type of amenity, the same grouping of amenities, no matter where you are, whether it's an urban or rural landscape, east or west, and seeing consistent maintenance of those amenities. Predictability, meaning you have a reasonable expectation that within every X number of miles, you're going to have access to a restroom, a place to get off of the canal and rest if you're in a paddlecraft, a place to camp, those kinds of things. and then having access to information so that you can find those things with a robust wayfinding system, so that you know how far you need to go to get to the next destination, and when you get there, what's available immediately on the trail, but also in nearby communities. And then lastly, I'll just note that the three shared amenities that people focused on, saying that this was a need that all users, regardless of type, regardless of distance, would need, are restrooms, drinking water, and signage. When we set out to do our data collection, I just want to highlight the geographic scope that we covered. So as Mona mentioned at the beginning, we did inventory the entire Erie Canal and Canalway Trail for amenities, starting in Tonawanda and ending in Waterford. So when we're talking about the Canalway Trail, we biked the entire system in segments and used a mobile device to collect geo-referenced data points for all of these amenities. And then on the water trail, we relied on the guidebook and other sources to identify places where there would be amenities located, then, drove there. And we didn't actually paddle the entire canal, but did take pains to make sure we hit every access point where there might be an amenity available. For the purpose of breaking our analysis down into more digestible pieces, we divided the trail into 4 regions, which you can see on the screen. The one that we are focusing on today in this workshop is Region 2. Yesterday was Region 1, and that'll be posted on the website. And then next week we have sessions on Regions 3 and 4 if you're interested to attend those. I want to highlight and kind of explain how we made determinations about which data to collect and include in the inventory. We started to get some questions about this already from several users and stakeholders. So as you can imagine, there are many amenities out in the world that conceivably could be used by someone who is using the trail. You could make the argument that anything within 5 miles from the Empire State Trail, a restroom, a hotel, anything like that might be useful to someone using it, but we really had to, focus in on the things that were within the immediate vicinity and were most likely to be used by trail users. So I'll give you a couple of examples of how we made that determination. So the first one on your screen right now is Amherst Veterans Canal Park. This is a pretty small park that's located, right adjacent to the canal. The Erie Canalway Trail runs right through it. All of the amenities within this park are directly geared towards trail use. So in this case, we would have inventoried everything here. Conversely, this is Parrington Park in just outside of Fairport. This is a much larger park that does serve the trail, but also has much of a broader community draw. So in this case, we would have focused on areas closest to the trail and places where we can immediately see amenities like restrooms and parking and docks. The area to the west where there's additional parking and playgrounds and tennis courts, we wouldn't have been inventorying anything like that. And then I also want to mention private property, whether it was a campground or a marina. We did not physically access those locations, just recognizing that we would have had to do a ton of coordination with each of these property owners to get permission to go on their property. But we did rely on secondary sources of information to make sure we at least, have a data point for that marina or that restroom, so that we can use that for our gap analysis, because we recognize that these private locations are used by canal users. They just were not factored into our conditions analysis. At the end of our data collection process, we had collected over 6,500 amenities across the 2 trails. With that scale, you can imagine we were not doing a detailed assessment of, measurements or very specific condition assessments, but we did, do a high-level visual assessment of every amenity to give it a rating for condition. For the type, we collected lots of information about, the material type, the capacity, associated amenities, things like that, and then made a determination of any barriers to accessibility. We also took a photo of every amenity that we inventoried. So in the end, there is a very robust data set of amenities that didn't exist before, and now it does. But just want to give a sense of what the level of detail was. And then at the bottom of your screen is the list of amenity types that we collected. So you can see those there. Using that inventory, we undertook a conditions assessment to get a sense of what's the current status of amenity condition on the trail. There was a study done a couple of years ago for Canal Corporation that assessed lots of assets along the trail, and I believe it was only the land trail. But they used a 3-tiered classification system, good, fair, and poor, and generally used the definitions that are shown on the screen. We made a determination that sticking with that classification system would make the most sense, just so that there could be consistency across these two studies, that they could be apples to apples in comparison. So something that was in good condition is something that shows no obvious signs of material wear, and everything that's operable still works. Something in fair condition would be something that may show some signs of surface wear, but is still operable, can still be used. And something in poor condition is going to be so structurally deteriorated that it could not be safely used, or parts are broken or inoperable. And you can see 3 bike repair stations on your screen. These are also shown in the report to give examples of what those classifications might have looked like. And then I'm just showing a second example for hand launches, for those that are good, no serious wear, everything is level and easy to use. Fair, you see some deterioration of the panels there, and then deterioration of the bank that connects it to the dock. And then poor, something that's so bowed and disconnected from the water that it wouldn't be safe to use. So this slide shows you at a global level what the condition of amenities on the trail looks like today. And we were, pleasantly surprised to see that between 65 and 85% of amenities, depending on the region, were in good condition. The first bar chart at the top shows all amenities on both the water trail and the land trail broken up by region. And then the second two show amenities, first only for the Erie Canal, and then second for the Erie Canalway Trail. And just kind of taking this global perspective, we can see and make some determinations that within region 1 and 2, the Erie Canal, the water trail, needs probably more investment. More amenities are shown in fair or poor condition as compared to regions 3 and 4, where the opposite is true, and the Canalway Trail may be in need of more investment. And this is just strictly based on condition rating, not based on presence or availability of amenities. Wanted to also give you sort of a deeper dive to see how all of the amenities in region 2 compare to each other. So this sort of summary bar chart shows that at a glance. The numbers to the right are the total number of amenities that were collected within this region. So you can kind of get a sense of, we had over 1,000 signs that we collected, only 2 bike repair stations, 5 marinas. So the scale plays a big factor, I think, in condition. So it's actually really great to see that even among the many, many signs that are located on the trail, the vast majority are in good condition. Some conclusions that we're drawing from this: restrooms, drinking fountains, and waste receptacles stick out in this chart as those in need of greatest investment. Parking lots and picnic areas also stand out, although I'll say that that was the case in every region, not only in region 2. And then benches, we did see in many places where there were benches in poor condition, they tended to be redundant. And so I think that presents a great opportunity to remove benches that may no longer serve a purpose. They may have been replaced by a newer model and just were never removed. And so that's something that I think different communities could look into to sort of clean things up and bring everything back to a consistent experience without necessarily needing additional investment. I mentioned accessibility a moment ago, and we did, based on our inventory, come up with some key examples of places where we see that accessibility could be enhanced. I do just want to mention that accessibility assessments are, that could have been a study even larger than this one unto itself to assess at an engineering scale the accessibility and compliance with ADA standards for each of these amenities. At our sort of high-level visual assessment, we were just kind of trying to give a starting point for further analysis and to come up with some examples like this that could help prioritize future investments. So I'll just kind of go through these pretty quickly. But the example on the left shows hand launches, where 2 examples of those where one presents a better opportunity for someone who might need assistance while launching, whereas the other makes it a little more difficult. So having a platform on both sides of the rollers. We heard from many stakeholders saying that this makes it a lot easier for someone to receive assistance. That is the case in the picture on the left. The one on the right, there's no space on the opposite side of the rollers for someone to assist. Similarly, looking at connections to adaptive launches. So we're showing 3 examples here. I think all 3 of these examples would technically, the launch itself would technically meet ADA standards, but when you look at how they are actually accessed, how someone would gain access to the launch, the one in the top left in Baldwinsville has a perfectly stable surface with a transition plate that connects the parking lot to the walkway to the gangway, making a seamless transition from a car to the launch. The one in Half Moon on the bottom left also has a transition plate, but you see some deterioration of the surface that might make it difficult to navigate. And then the one on the right in Palmyra has a nice landing pad, but beyond that, what you don't see in the picture is that it's a very long rocky path from the launch to a parking lot. So someone in a wheelchair or with another mobility impairment might have difficulty accessing this. A lot of the things on the screen here may go without saying or may be very obvious to most of you, but I think it was worth documenting in the report just that accessibility is and should be a key focus of design for new investments. We know that new amenities have to meet ADA standards when they're installed, but going beyond that to make sure that these locations that are, major public access points for recreation are as accessible and universally designed as possible. There's a couple of resources, including Canalway's hand launch facility design guide that make that very easy to do. And it was certainly a great resource to us during this study. And then Canal Corporation's kit of parts that Sasha mentioned, all of the amenities that are in that guide are accessible or could be, modified to be accessible. So it's great to see that focus happening through both of these organizations. Something we heard from stakeholders that I really want to highlight is the importance of creating networks of accessible hubs and nodes. So if you're thinking about someone with a mobility impairment who wants to enjoy recreation on the trail, maybe they have one location that's really fantastic, like Mercer Park in Baldwinsville, a great parking lot, accessible restrooms, an accessible launch right there, everything in close proximity and great. But if you get on the water there and then you don't have anywhere to go to access another accessible launch, then that makes the whole experience less exciting and less accessible overall. So thinking about ways to start with what we have, places where we already know we have strong accessibility, and building out from there to create these networks is a way to really enhance the experience for all users. And then we also heard frequently that having information to understand what is actually available at each location along the trail is great for anyone who may have an impairment. What is accessible or what is defined as accessible, I think, is different for every single person who uses the trail. So giving people information so they can make their own decisions about where they want to go and what they might be able to use is also key. And then lastly, I just want to give an example of, this is from the hand launch facility design guide of an accessible hand launch. And I think everyone would agree that this really epitomizes what it is to design something universally. At the same time, we heard from several stakeholders that a launch like this, if this is the only thing that exists at any one location, folks who cannot use rollers for any reason, whether it's their paddlecraft doesn't support it or they just don't feel comfortable using them and would prefer another way to launch or land, they wouldn't be able to use this. It's too high out of the water and there's a rail around the platform that prevents you from kind of getting in or out of your boat. So the importance of pairing something like this with another way of accessing the water is important to make sure that every location can be used by everybody. So best practices to infill gaps. We used our stakeholder interviews, best practices research to identify a series of guidelines that are really just that, guidelines, not meant to be hard and fast rules, that would help us frame and organize our recommendations for what are the priorities for investment. So the first thing we did was identify, in an ideal world, what would be the right spacing of amenities along the trail, or what would be too far between amenities for people to travel. And we based this really on what we heard from stakeholders and how frequently they said that they need to use various amenities. So there are some that get used quite regularly, like a restroom. There are others like showers and laundry that might get used once a day or every few days. And then we based our spacing recommendations on how far people might be able to reasonably travel within that time frame. So that's how these spacing recommendations were developed. The previous slide was for amenities that might be shared by all users. This kind of breaks it down by individual amenity types by user type. So bicyclist amenities, boater amenities, and paddler amenities. We also developed recommendations for what we would consider to be a hub or a node of amenities. And so this was meant to be a way of kind of organizing and focusing our recommendations to areas that are most likely to see high traffic and be a sort of a gathering place to access the trail or to take a rest or a break along the trail. And so the difference between hubs and nodes is really one of scale. They are very similar in the sense that both would be proximate to some center of activity, whether that's a village downtown, an urban center, or a park. Could also be a lock. They both have connections to ideally both trails, though we recognize that there are places where the two trails diverge. And then they both have some concentration of amenities. So the difference is really that a hub is going to be a larger place with a larger center of activity and maybe a higher concentration of amenities that are meant to be used by various user types, whether it's a beginner, an advanced user, a long distance or a short distance user. Variety and size would tend to be smaller in a node. And then at each of those locations, we developed recommendations for in an ideal world, again, what amenities would be located there. And we prioritize these into higher priority and lower priority. So the dark blue is priority 1 and the light blue is priority 2. You can see for hubs and there's a larger number of amenities that are considered a high priority and less in the nodes. So just to give one example, looking at restrooms, so we have 2 slots here, one for permanent and one for temporary. One determination we made is that in an ideal world, every hub would have a permanent restroom, and so that's why this gets a high priority. Conversely, it's permanent restrooms are light blue in the node because, yes, that would be great if we had a permanent restroom, certainly wouldn't discourage that installation. But we heard from many users that a temporary restroom or a porta potty certainly serves the need, especially at a smaller location. And so that's why that's a higher priority for node. Using those sort of best practices and guiding principles, we undertook our needs assessment and developed opportunities for investment. So I'm going to start with sort of the location-specific amenities, and we're going to focus in on region 2, but then I'll also talk about things that we saw on a global scale as well. So for each region, we identified locations of hubs and nodes, which are meant to be very approximate. They're not certainly like defining boundaries or anything like that, but just kind of showing areas of concentration. We identified significant gaps in amenities and then looked for locations that might provide opportunities, whether at a hub or a node or outside of a hub or a node, to fill those gaps by providing additional amenities. This is, again, meant to be a guide for Canal Corporation, for Erie Canalway, and for partner communities. It certainly doesn't preclude investment of any type that would happen outside of what's shown on these maps, but it's really just meant to kind of focus recommendations. So this is an overview of region 2, and this region is certainly unique in the sense that almost the entire region has the 2 trails separated. So the Erie Canal to the north going through Oneida Lake, and the Canalway Trail to the south, passing just south of Onondaga Lake. So that presents a unique challenge just because it almost means we have to have, 2 sets of hubs and nodes where people have access to the things that they need. So maybe starting with the Erie Canal to the north, the hubs that we identified are in Baldwinsville, Sylvan Beach, and Bellamy Harbor Park in Rome. We've also identified on the Erie Canalway Trail as a potential node, Syracuse Inner Harbor. We didn't see a strong concentration of amenities located there now. Without some sort of gathering place in this area, it can be a pretty long distance between Erie Canal Park in Camillus and Cedar Bay Park in DeWitt. There's also We know a lot of investment happening along the Onondaga Lake waterfront in this area right now. They recently completed an LWRP and are looking at enhancing the Inner Harbor. So we see definite potential for synergy to have investment here that could benefit both local public and trail users. So you'll see some potentials throughout the report. And then this kind of gives you a snapshot of the amenities that are currently available at each of these hubs and nodes, and most importantly, what's not available. This is not to say that every single item on this screen should be lit, so to speak, but it just gives you a sense of how these different places compare to each other. So anywhere that you see an icon that's in a bold color, that means that it currently exists. Anything that's grayed out does not currently exist. And then anything, actually, I don't think we have any on this map. In some of the other regions, you'll see icons circled in red, meaning that there's an amenity there that's in poor condition that would probably need to be replaced. So we didn't want to discount them, but they certainly need a focus for investment. And then the rest of the series of maps shows amenities located throughout the trail, whether or not at a hub or a node. And this is kind of how we developed our gap analysis. So this first map shows what we call shared amenities, which are really only restrooms and drinking fountains. Those are those amenities that are going to be used by every single user, regardless of mode. And here you see that the Erie Canal is actually very well outfitted with restrooms and drinking fountains. I think a lot of this is due to Oneida Lake and the number of parks and public access points that are located along the lake. Baldwinsville also has, a really robust center of activity and has clearly focused their development around the water. So there's plenty of amenities located there. One thing we noticed in Baldwinsville, I mentioned Mercer Park earlier, has a fantastic setup for paddlers. And then the marina located near the lock has a fantastic setup for boaters. But there are amenities located at the marina, such as showers and restrooms, that could be beneficial to those paddlers if they knew that they existed. So that could be a great opportunity for wayfinding signage to connect those two locations. They're pretty close to each other. There could also be an opportunity to maybe install an additional launch at the marina for paddlers. I talked about Syracuse Inner Harbor. Certainly a restroom at a minimum would be needed there in order to really attract users to stop and rest there. And then we also noticed at Lock 21, which is shown as a potential node, there is a restroom there, but because of the vertical walls that are located there, they can't really access it. So thinking about a way to provide access to paddlers to be able to get out of the water and use the restroom would be great. Throughout the report, we identify recognizing that installing drinking fountains is a real challenge because there's infrastructure implications. You actually have to have drinkable water coming to that location. You can't just plop it down anywhere. But where we saw permanent restrooms without a drinking fountain, we've highlighted those as drinking fountain opportunities. That could be a place where the barrier is a little bit less to install a drinking fountain. And so Sylvan Beach is one of those examples. Looking at amenities that are specific to paddlers. So now we're just talking about launches and boat rentals or paddlecraft rentals. Again, well, I guess here we would really just be focusing on the Erie Canal, although there are a couple of launches located along the Inner Harbor in Syracuse. This is pretty well positioned as well. What we tried to do is identify locations where we saw adaptive launches that have already been installed, because we heard from many stakeholders that adaptive launches that are, make it very easy to try out paddling for the first time if you're not comfortable getting into the water another way. That pairs really well with a paddlecraft rental program, where someone who doesn't own a kayak and has never kayaked before would have one to rent and then have a really easy way of getting into the water and potentially someone to assist them if they need that help. So some of these recommendations shown on the screen are based on that. So if we're seeing an adaptive launch, we would like to also see a rental located there. And then we also make the recommendation that it would be great if all hubs had adaptive launches and rental paddlecraft rentals. Throughout the entire study area, not only in Region 2, we recognize that boater amenities are pretty well positioned, especially in Region 2, just with Oneida Lake coming through this area. The number of both public and private marinas that are available makes it a really great place for boating. So I think this area is really well set. We didn't see any obvious need to fill any gaps. And particularly Brewerton was mentioned as a key location for boaters, especially long distance boaters, because they can get fuel, they can get repairs, they can store their boats if they need to. And so that was kind of the primary driver for identifying that as a node. Talking about bicyclists, I think the story is a little bit different. I think this is one of the areas where bicycle amenities is most lacking along the trail. So we do see in the Syracuse area, they have a bike share program. And so that does give some opportunities for bike rentals. But of course, there's nothing else within this area that allows for bike rentals. We would love it if there were, bike racks, bike repair stations at every hub and node, and also a bike rental at every hub. And that's just not the case right now, which is okay, but just kind of shows a place where there might be a focus for investment. A couple of the nodes in this location, like Cedar Bay Park, don't even have a bike rack. So that would be a pretty low-hanging fruit for investment. And then kind of taking a broader approach to the things that we saw as needed throughout the trail. Thinking about, the amount of money that's available for capital investment, everyone is funding constrained. How can we maximize money that's being spent to improve the recreational experience by making things, making those investments kind of go as far as they can and be available to all users. So some of the ways that we saw as opportunities to do so, comfort amenities, things like showers and laundry. These things tend to be located in marinas or places where long distance boaters might be stopping. At the same time, we know that paddlers and bicyclists also enjoy long distance travel. And, when you think about trails like, I'm blanking on the name. There's a bike trail that goes from DC to Pittsburgh that is very well loved by bicyclists and thank you. Yes. Appreciate it. If, the Erie Canal wants to be something akin to that, making those amenities more available that make it easier to travel long distances could be accomplished just by using better wayfinding to connect people from those marina locations to the land trail. Similarly, locks and marinas, we noticed a lot of times tend to, and rightly so, tend to be focused on boaters and are at the scale of boaters. But we heard from many stakeholders that when you're in a paddlecraft and you're approaching a lock or a marina with very high vertical walls and it feels very imposing, you might not feel comfortable locking through. Being able to see an obvious location where, yes, this is where I can get out of the water. This is where there's a clearly marked portage trail to go around the lock. That would help people feel more welcome and kind of have this sense of confidence as they approach these locations. Improving connections to the trail. I think this was most common in Region 1, where the canal itself is along the Mohawk River, and that is sort of separated from a lot of the downtowns. But creating opportunities where people get a sense of arrival when they come off the trail or get out of the water, and they know where to go to access resources or other amenities can help a lot. And then kind of going back to locks for a moment, we know that locks are often the place that people are most likely to camp along the trail. We noticed just from our observations that these locations tend to not have a very welcoming feel. There's not much signage, nothing to give you, again, that confidence that, yes, you can stay here, you can be here overnight, you'll be safe here. I think just having some signage and other sort of markers to help people recognize where they are would be helpful. Focusing in on wayfinding for a moment. So the three, these are three of the four things that people mentioned over and over as being in need of investment along the trail. So trail markers and mile markers, we saw some inconsistency in how they were used, how frequently they were spaced, and sort of the level of finish. So the one to the top of the screen, top left, is a very nice formal mile marker. I think users would like to see something like this consistently installed throughout the trail. This more informal one on the bottom of the screen was in, I think, the Pittsford or Fairport area, which, serves its purpose, but doesn't necessarily align with the rest of the numeration. People would like to see this more consistently. And then on-road trail markers, which are, on the on-road portion of the Canalway Trail, certainly very limited in what can be done with these because they're governed by MUTCD. But, wayfinding, people did mention several times that that is a concern on some of those on-road portions where it's not as obvious that you're on a trail. And then the water trail marker, which has been installed in order to help people who are on the water be able to see where they can land. I think are very useful, very consistent, and in great condition overall. But giving people an additional point of entry from a parking lot or from a roadway to say, yes, this is where you can access the water. So maybe extending these signs out closer to the road would also be helpful, or installing a second one. In terms of wayfinding for accessing destinations, whether it's along the trail or when you arrive at a certain sort of stopping point, we saw a lot of variety in condition, as you can kind of see from some of these examples on the screen. What people would love to see is something that's simple, shows the direction to the next location and how far it is so they can plan their trip. And the sign on the bottom left does a great job of that. And then when you get to sort of a village center or a park or something like that, a place where you might be wanting to stop and rest, people want to be able to see simple signs like the two on the left-hand side that show, a general direction to a general location. Yes, I have a reasonable level of confidence that there would be a restaurant or, a library or something like that if I follow this sign. They really felt like that's all that's needed. Though we do recognize there are a lot of very helpful maps out there, like the ones on the right. And if you're in a place that's, a hub and a place that you might be stopping for a long time, you may stop to kind of peruse those maps. So they certainly do have their place. Based on everything that I just went through, we identified a couple of next steps or places where Canalway and Erie Canal, Canalway and Canal Corporation could focus in the future. I think these are also broadly applicable to anyone on the call who might be interested in working to invest in the trail. So establishing an implementation plan that kind of lays out the steps to enhancing a certain area or a piece of property along the trail, identifying how much that's going to cost, and looking for funding opportunities, which we're going to talk about in a moment. There's a lot of opportunities out there, both public, private, and nonprofit, to fund these sorts of investments. Engaging with community partners, like I said, we did a lot of stakeholder engagement throughout this process, but that was only a single point in time. I think a lot of our community partners are talking to folks every single day, people who are coming on or off the trail. And I think best, what people need and have the best sort of connection to users and can understand what would work best in your area. Accessibility assessment. So I talked about what we did at a high level. I think it would really be beneficial to take sort of piece by piece different locations along the trail and do a more thorough assessment of the entire area to figure out how you can really make it inclusive for as many people as possible. And then lastly, as investments are being made, incorporating signage and amenity design standards where they're applicable. So as Sasha mentioned, those are applicable on Canal Corporation land, but you're certainly, encouraged to use the amenity designs as well in any location. And then exploring opportunities for private partnership. One of the barriers we saw and heard about to encouraging more people to use the trail is related to, giving someone sort of first-time access. So that means having access to an affordable paddlecraft rental, boat rental, or bike rental. I think those are very often going to be provided by private vendors. And we've seen some success like in Region 1 with upstate kayak rentals. I think there's a few in Region 2 as well in the Baldwinsville area. So any opportunities that folks have to expand on those ideas would certainly be welcome, I think, to users. All right, so with that, I'm going to pass it back to Sasha, who's going to go over some funding opportunities before we break.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot of need regarding user type amenities on the canal system. And the good news is there are state funding opportunities available for these types of purposes. I know that municipalities and counties can find it within their own budget to also finance these types of improvements. However, I know budgets are tight, and there are several grants that are offered through the state and through partnership opportunities that can help meet these community and recreational needs. So the first few I'll mention are funding opportunities available to local governments and not-for-profits through Canal Corporation and also through partnership grants. So the first one I'm going to mention is a partnership program between Canal Corporation and Erie Canal National Heritage Corridor. These are small grants, and it's called the New York State Canal System Events and Tourism Infrastructure and Amenities Grants. And this program is intended to capture smaller projects that fall below our larger grant program that I'll mention in a moment, that fall below the minimum threshold of $25,000. So the maximum here for tourism and infrastructure is $24,000. And we also support events that promote the canal system. On the tourism and amenity side, these do not need to be capital projects. It can include equipment rental like portable water fountains or even portable toilets, or installing sheds to house your maintenance equipment, just as a few examples. So we view this grant program as actually being a really, really great way for communities to potentially address some of the gaps, the needs provided in the gap analysis, without needing to establish a larger capital project or like a pocket park. And so I would say definitely use this program as a tool. I want to note that as part of this year's program, we are placing additional emphasis for projects on accessibility. So ADA and universal design will be a standard that should be met and will be scored as part of the review process. This program requires a 50% match, and the time frame for application submission will be October 14th of this year. It will close at the end of November, and we will award in February of next year. So hopefully those who are listening and will listen to this webinar will start putting their thoughts together and reviewing the report so that we can see some interesting applications come in, and also applications that hopefully help address some of the gaps that were identified in the report. And then next, we have our Canalway grant program, and this is offered through the consolidated funding application process that New York State runs. This is each year we have $1 million annually for these competitive grants. These are for capital projects only within the canal corridor. It has a minimum funding amount of $25,000 and a maximum amount of $150,000 with a 50% match requirement.
This is the one you're on, right, Sasha? 25,000.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
And the priorities are strategic alignment with the REDCs and Empire State Trail. Community support is important to us. So these should be projects that are born out of the community or needed by community members. We look for project readiness in these capital projects. So being able to implement within a 2-year time frame, effectiveness and impact, and then financial viability are all priorities of ours. The enrollment time has now passed. The application period was May, closed in July, and we're actively reviewing applications now. So we will award sometime in January. So I would just also mention that this time frame is pretty consistent. And so if you are thinking about projects for next year, kind of look to have something together by spring of 2026. And we send out notifications about this application. And or this grant program, if you have any questions about it, please email me. Our contact information is at the end of the presentation. And there's also a link in this slide. Oh,
did you cover this one already? Okay.
I covered that one. Sorry, I think we switched from yesterday.
Nope, that's all good. Other sources.
And so I also want to mention a few other funding sources offered through the state, federally, and then also through not-for-profits. There's several other consolidated funding application grants that you can apply for as part of your Canalway grant project too. So there's the Environmental Protection Fund grant program for parks, preservation, and heritage areas. There's also the Municipal Parks and Recreation Grant Program administered through parks, through state parks. And then there's the Recreational Trails Program. That is a federal funding that is administered through state parks. Very competitive, but if your project or if you're trying to fill a gap and it is in alignment with the trail, I'd say certainly you could pursue that grant. And these are all capital projects, so I would say they definitely have a higher dollar value, would need to align more closely with a larger scale project versus just installing a bench or a water fountain. And then lastly, from the state side, there's the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. That's a program offered through the Department of State, again, for larger scale waterfront revitalization projects. Federally, there's the Rails to Trails Conservancy. That's, Mona, I think sorry, but you added these bullets, but that's a national, right? Not for profit.
Yes, yep,
Yes.
but there is federal money in there.
Mhm.
So I just added these as examples of other types of funding, federal, nonprofit, private foundations. The Ralph C. Wilson Foundation grant that's primarily focused on Western New York, so it may not apply in the central area. But, for example, the Athletic Brewing Company, there's a 2 for the Trail grant. It's intended for trail maintenance, waterway protection, invasive species cleanup, beach cleanups, urban green space cleanup. So those are also available for, trail organizations or municipalities. And then the last thing I wanted to mention that came up in yesterday's workshop was the Boating Infrastructure Grant Program. It's through Boat US, but it's administered by the New York State Parks. So it pays for docks and amenities for visiting boaters. So it's paid for through excise taxes and duties. So those are available for, if you are interested in adding more boater amenities to your community. So I think that's it for other sources. I don't know if you had anything else to add, Sasha.
I just want to say that Erica Schneider from Parks and Trails New York said the Recreational Trails Program grants, her understanding is that they're nationwide, not-for-profit funds, but that their
Okay.
website also has a lot of information about other federal grants. So certainly you can click on that link. All of these are hyperlinked and find out more about grant opportunities for amenities and trail projects and waterway projects.
Great. Thanks, Erica.
Right.
So
that concludes it. But we have time for questions if there are any.
I just want to thank you for giving that presentation. That's great. I know next week it covers from like Baldwinsville further west. Will that in the I assume in the like the second part of the presentation there will be more like specifics on that area. The reason I ask is Lysander actually goes from roughly where the Seneca and Oneida River meet to form the Oswego, and then we go west across Lake. So, I'm going to attend both because Baldwinsville was sort of a split to see, but it was a great presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's exactly right. We're gonna I was just gonna say the first half of next week's presentation will be exactly the same as what you saw. But then when we get into the region specific maps, there will be specific recommendations.
Okay, great. So I'll
Yep.
probably jump on for the second part of that one.
Yeah, there you go.
Because
Yep.
we're currently, the village of Baldwinsville, the town of Van Buren, and town of Lysander are starting an LWRP. So this was like
Fantastic.
great timing to
Yeah.
get these presentations along with that. So I appreciate
Absolutely.
it. And, you know, it gave me a lot of ideas on what we have in Baldwinsville. We are very fortunate that Baldwinsville is very connected to the canal system, and the village has a park. You know, we have multiple places where people can, you know, launch a kayak. The biggest thing is having the lock in the middle of Baldwinsville. It sort of divides the river for accessibility. But we're hopefully with the LWRP, we're going to take care of that on the what I call the downstream side going east. So we don't have
Well,
a lot of amenities on that side of the lock outside of the village.
I have to say, Kevin, that I personally inventoried the Baldwinsville area and I was blown away. It was like a Friday afternoon. I was just blown away by the number of people just hanging out on the marina, like having a grand old time. It's just like,
Yeah.
It's so central to the village. It's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, it's very, I mean, it literally runs through the middle of the village. So, you know, it is, it's nice to see a village that can have the opportunity to get into the people that use the canal system.
Yeah.
You know, so thank you.
You, is there anybody else that has any questions?
I just want to note too that the report that we're talking about is live on our website. You can go through it. Leanne, maybe you know the exact pages, but like the gap analysis, that information I believe starts on, maybe it's like page 90 or something like that. It's pretty
Yeah.
late in the report, but still
Right.
extensive. So like Kevin, let's just say as an example, certainly please join us for the next briefing, but the graphics and information and data is very easy to digest. And so like I encourage anyone to just like look through the report. If you're interested predominantly in the gap analysis, like you can just skip ahead and like very quickly find your region, find your area, and see like who the owner of that property is, where they're making the recommendation. It's really the information is laid out in a really great way, and so you might not have to to
Sure.
sit in if,
No,
but
Yes.
please
Thank you.
please do sit in. I'm just
Yeah.
Bring your friends.
yes.
But yeah, Region 2 starts on page 72, and then Region 3, which you're probably also interested in, would follow that.
Great. Thank you.
Well, if anybody has any questions that they think of later, our contact information, it was on the slide, but I believe that you'll
can
be
share
able
it
to
again.
get.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be great. You know, feel free to email either me or Sasha, and you know, we'll follow up from there. So
Okay.
thank you, everybody, for taking the time to do this today.
Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.